Today's date is it's August 2012. Um, the year is 2011. August 12th, 2011. Time in is 5:07 p.m. I am reading. This is Business Class 340. I'm reading from my business law book. The subject today is is law. Law. It's called law. So let us begin. The law has been a main means of controlling corporate misdeeds. Lawmakers usually assume that corporations and executives are rational actors that can be deterred from unethical and socially irresponsible behavior by the threats the law presents. Those threats are fines and civil damages, such as those imposed and increased by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. For deterrence to work, however, corporate decision makers must know when the law penalties will be imposed, fear those penalties, and act rationally to avoid them. To some extent, the law's abilities to control executive misbehavior is limited. As we discussed earlier in this chapter, corporate lobbying may result in laws reflecting the views of corporations, not society as a whole. Some corporate executives may not know the law exists. Others may view the penalties merely as a cost of doing business. Some may think the risk of detection is so low that the corporation can avoid detection. Other executives believe they are above the law, that it does not apply to them out of arrogance or a belief that they know better than lawmakers. Some rationalize their violation of the law on the grounds that everybody does it. Nonetheless, for all its flaws, the law is an important means by which society controls business misconduct of all the device for corporate control. We have considered only market forces and the law impose direct penalties for corporate misbehavior. Although legal rules have no special claim to moral correctness, at least they are not knowable. Laws also are the result of an open political process in which competing arguments are made and evaluated. This cannot be said about the intuitions of a corporate ethics officer, ethics from public interest groups, or the theories of economists or philosophers, except to the extent they are reflected in law. Moreover, in the mature political system, like the United States, respect for and adherence to law is a well-entrenched value. Where markets fail to promote socially responsible conduct, the law can do the job. For example, the antitrust laws discussed in Chapter 49, while still controversial, have limited the worst anti-competitive business practices. The federal security laws examined in Chapter 45 and 46 arguably restored investor confidence in the securities market after the stock market crash of 1929. Although environmentalists often demand more regulation, the environmental laws treated in Chapter 52 have improved the quality of water and reduced our exposure to toxic substances. Employment regulation discussed in Chapter 51, especially those banning employment discrimination, have forced significant changes in the American workplace. Thus, the law has an accomplished record as a corporate control device. Indeed, sometimes the law does their job too well, often imposing a maze of regulations that deter socially valuable profit seeking without producing comparable benefits. Former Fed Chairman Greenspan once wrote, "Government regulation is not an alternative means of protecting the consumer. It does not build quality into goods or accuracy into information. Its sole contribution is to substitute force and fear for incentive as the protector of the consumer." The hope was that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act would restore investor confidence in audited financial statements and corporate governance. A 2007 survey by Financial Executives International found that 69% of financial executives agreed that compliance with SOX Section 404 resulted in more investors' confidence in these companies' financial reports. 50% agreed that financial reports were more accurate. Those results came despite the high cost of complying with the act. An average of $1.7 million for 168 companies with market capitalization above $75 million. For larger companies like General Electric, the cost is even higher. In each of 2004 and 2005, GE spent more than $30 million to comply with Section 404, which requires verification of adequate internal controls. Alright, this next one's about its guidelines for ethical decision making. We can fit this in this 15-minute time limit, this 15-minute schedule. Guidelines for ethical decision making. Now that you understand the basics of ethical theories and the issues in the corporate governance debate, how do you use this information to make decisions for your business that are ethical and socially responsible? That is, what process will ensure that you have considered all the ethical ramifications and arrived at a decision that is good for your business, good for your community, good for society as a whole, and good for you? I believe we got time for this next one. It's called What Facts Impact My Decision? This is such an obvious component of any good decision that it hardly seems necessary to mention. Yet it is common that people make only a feeble attempt to acquire all the facts necessary to a good decision. Many people enter decision-making process biased in favor of a particular option. As a result, they look only for facts that support that option. You have seen this done many times by your friends and opponents, and since you are an honest person, you have seen yourself do this as well from time to time. In addition, demands on your time fatigue, laziness, ignorance, or where to look for facts, and an aversion to inconvenience someone who has information contribute to a reluctance or inability to dig deep for relevant facts. Since good decisions cannot be made in a partial vacuum of information, it is important to recognize when you need to acquire more facts. That is primarily the function of your other classes, which may teach you how to make stock market investment decisions, how to audit a company's financial records, and how to do marketing research. For our purpose, let's consider this example. Suppose we work for a television manufacturing company that has a factory in Sacramento, California. Our company has placed you in charge of investigating the firm's decision whether to move the factory to Juarez, Mexico. What facts are needed to make this decision, and where do you find those facts? Among the facts you need are: what are the firm's labor costs in Sacramento, and what will those costs be in Juarez? How much will labor costs increase in subsequent years? What is the likelihood of good labor relations in each location? What is and will be the productivity level of employee in each city? What are and will be transportation costs of moving the firm's inventory to market? What impact will the move make on employees, their families, the communities, the schools, and other stakeholders in each community? Will Sacramento employees find other jobs in Sacramento or elsewhere? How much will we pay in severance pay? Here is a figure 1, guidelines for ethical decision making. Okay, 1. What facts impact my decision? 2. What are the alternatives? 3. Who are the stakeholders? 4. How do the alternatives impact society as a whole? 5. How do the alternatives impact my business firm? 6. How do the alternatives impact me, the decision maker? 7. What are the ethics of each alternative? 8. What are the practical constraints of each alternative? 9. What course of action should be taken, and how do we implement it? How will customers and suppliers be impacted by our decision if we move to Juarez? Will our customers boycott our products even if our televisions are better and cheaper than before? If we move, will our employers' costs increase or decrease? How will our profitability be affected? How will shareholders view the decision? Who are our shareholders? Do we have a lot of Mexican shareholders, or do American dominate our shareholders list? What tax concessions and other benefits will the city of Sacramento give our firm if we promise to stay in Sacramento? Give us Sacramento. What will see without Juarez? What will see without Juarez and the government of Mexico give us if we move to Juarez? How will our decision impact United States-Mexican economic and political relations? This looks like a lot of facts, but we have only scratched the surface. You can probably come up with another 100 facts that should be researched. To give you another example of how thorough managers must be to make prudent decisions, consider that the organizers for the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, Australia, created 800 different terrorist scenarios before developing an anti-terrorism plan. You can see that to some extent we are discussing other factors in the guidelines as we garner facts. The factors do overlap to some degree. Note also that some of the facts you want to find are not facts at all, but estimates such as cost and sales projections. We'll discuss in the 8th guideline the practical problems with the facts we find. And I believe okay, what are the alternatives is another section. Let's see if we can finish this one 4 minutes. Yes, I believe we can. What are the alternatives? A decision maker must be thorough in listing the alternative courses of actions. For many of us, the temptation is to conclude that there are only two options: to do something or not to do something. Let's take our decision whether to move our factory to Juarez, Mexico. You might think that the only choices are to stay in Sacramento or to move to Juarez. Yet there are several combinations that fall in between those extremes. For example, we could consider maintaining the factory in Sacramento, temporarily opening a smaller factory in Juarez, and gradually moving for productions to Mexico as employee in Sacramento retire. Another alternative is to offer jobs in the Juarez factory out to all Sacramento employees who want to move. If per unit labor costs in Sacramento are our concern, we would ask employees in Sacramento to accept lower wages and fringe benefits or to increase their productivity. There are many other alternatives that you can imagine. It is important to consider all reasonable alternatives. If you do not, you increase the risk the best course of action was not chosen only because it was not considered. Okay, let's stop there. I want to see my new